I hope everyone can hear me. My screen is freezing slightly, so I'm not sure if everybody can hear me, but I'll start my introduction. So welcome to this panel, Corporates and Startups Meeting Halfway. This is something that's pretty much, my job every day. It's close to my heart. So I work in Barclays Ventures and predominantly focus on Rise, which is our Fintech hub. And there we have 4 Fintech hubs globally. London and New York are our flagship sites, and we have partner labs in Eagle Labs, where we also focus on other verticals. And within those labs, including Rise, we focus on collaborating with startups every day, from co-investing, co-creating, and co-branding. So this question of how can corporates and startups meet halfway is something that we live and breathe every day in my team. And I'm just excited to begin the panel and hear from our fantastic panelists today on some of the key questions. So first of all, we will hear from Per, who is from IKEA, and he runs the IKEA Startup Bootcamp. Next, we have Alex Farcet from Rainmaking Consulting, who worked with Per on the IKEA Startup Bootcamp. And lastly, we have Matt Johnson, who is from Conductive and was one of the startups to join the IKEA Bootcamp. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hello. So why don't we start with introductions? So Per, do you want to begin and talk to us a little bit about the IKEA Bootcamp?
Yes, thank you for that, Sonal. So I'm really happy to be on this call because I am exactly as Sonal. I have a passion for this to work in the stream between startups and corporates. And at IKEA, a couple of years ago, when we got the task to really see how could we stretch ourselves and learn from the entrepreneurs, innovators in the world, we created the IKEA Bootcamp program together with Alex and his team from Rainmaking. And this has been a fantastic journey that we are onto, because at IKEA, we have changed our business model to open up to say that we want to be much closer to the many partners in the world and much closer to the many people in the world so that we can together co-create a better everyday life for the many people. That has been the starting point for us creating the IKEA Bootcamp program, where we have now run 2 different iterations of it, one to learn and one to do pilots.
Great, thank you, Per. And Matt, let's hear from you. Can you talk to us a bit about how you met Per and how you joined the Startup Bootcamp?
Sure. So as just a bit of context, Conductive is a printed electronics company. We have a printed sensor technology that we license to corporates, and we also sell as a development kit to individuals. I would say that our experience with Bootcamp was really kind of old school business development. I was reaching out to people at IKEA because we thought that there was the opportunity to do something together. And luckily, Per had created enough momentum within the organization that people who I contacted at IKEA said, hey, you have to check out this program and apply for it. So we applied, we were in the first batch, and it was incredibly successful for us. And that relationship continues to this day. I think in general, this topic of how do startups and corporates meet halfway is of real interest to me, because we have experience where it has worked really well, where there is a halfway point, and then we've had experience where it hasn't worked quite as well. And I'd love to share some thoughts on how it can improve from both sides.
Yeah, absolutely. We'd love to hear that. And last thing, Alex, could you talk to us a little bit about your role in the IKEA Bootcamp, and then also what does Rainmaking do?
Sure. Yeah, so we're an innovation, design and execution company. We work at the intersection of corporates and startups. So this panel topic is very close to our heart. We also launched Startup Bootcamp. So we've done a lot of work with startups, and more through the last few years, where the open innovation movement has really exploded. We found ourselves acting as a bridge and a glue between corporates and startups. And yeah, IKEA is we're headquartered in Copenhagen, but we're all over the world. But IKEA is sort of in our backyard, and obviously it was one of the companies we dreamed of working with. We met and just started discussing where are you on your innovation journey, and we designed together with Per, really in partnership. I think probably the best summary of what we've done is acting as partners and designing and executing this together, and it's been a lot of fun.
Great, thank you everyone for your intro. So I think we should just start with some discussion on the bootcamp in particular before we move on to collaboration. I think bootcamps, accelerators, they're a fantastic way to bring together a corporate and a startup in a beginning, middle, and end scenario, and try and work as effectively together during that time as possible, and then beyond once you've really fostered that relationship. So can we talk a little bit about the IKEA bootcamp? What do you think, Per, was the biggest benefit of running boot camps, and how do you think they've changed as you've iterated them?
Yes, it's when we started the boot camp, we always have said that in any of our cooperation startups, we should always work towards the free winner. So everything we should do, it should be good for our customers, it should be good for the startup we work with, and it should be good for IKEA. So that has been the setup for it in the backbone. And then we have gone out and said, okay, we have an agenda in IKEA that we are working on. We want to be more accessible, we want to be more affordable, and we shall have a positive impact on the people, planet, and society. This is IKEA's long-term plan, and we went out to the world then together with Alex and Rainmaking team to see, do we have startups in the world that believe in the same things that we do? And the fantastic response we got was so overwhelming. We got more than 1,000 applications from more than 60 countries around the world saying that, yes, we believe in the same things that you do, IKEA. Let us co-create on this. So we then went out from the first boot camp. We were very clear, say, we want to learn. We are beginners in this. We partnered up with Rainmaking and say, we want to learn in the first boot camp. We're going to accelerate the startups, and internally we're going to learn how can we be more efficient working with startups. And we had Matt and another 9 companies in like Conductive, where we spent a lot of time to accelerate their business by taking people from all over IKEA to be some mentors and supporting them. And we had a lot of sessions. And so the startups, they got acceleration. And from IKEA, we got learning. We got learning how can we, in a structured way, work with startups. So for the second iteration of the IKEA Bootcamp, we went from accelerating startup to co-creating pilots with startups, where we went with the business owners in IKEA that in their business plan had areas where they needed a new way to think, new innovation, a new solution. We went out with these to the world, we got the startups, and together we co-created pilots. So it was a big shift from the first startup bootcamp that we did, which was accelerating startups, to the second bootcamp where it was about co-creating pilots.
Great, thank you. I think that's really important, seeing that iteration slowly, and I don't think you can go from 0 to 10 immediately. So it's really interesting to hear how you've started to build that up. Matt, could you talk to us a little bit about why you chose to join a boot camp, and what's your experience of working with a corporate that you've met through that mechanism and working with corporates in the old school development way?
Yeah, so I think that I see there's a few different models to engage with corporates. I think the simplest one is, a direct outreach, right? So you identify that you want to work with a company, or you have some sort of specific proposition for them, and you work your network to find a way to get an introduction. And I think, that is challenging and time consuming in that you might not know who the decision maker is. It's hard to understand what the real internal prioritization is. So you can end up in a lot of dead ends, but we've certainly had some success doing that. I think on the other extreme, you have something that is like an accelerator, like the first version of the boot camp, where you are working in close collaboration with the corporate, and they are taking a very holistic view of your business. I think IKEA is probably unique in that I genuinely believe in the first version of the bootcamp that IKEA wished to accelerate the development of our business, whether or not it directly benefited IKEA. And I think it was very clear. And I don't think that a lot of companies would do that necessarily. I think there's a middle ground, which is maybe more like the second version of the bootcamp, where you have well-identified challenges or needs within the organization, and then startups are brought in to respond to that. And for us, that is the best model, because I think the challenge for a startup is knowing what the internal prioritization is and knowing who to talk to and who the real champions are, to avoid the kind of innovation theater trap, but also to avoid a kind of long middle where you're stuck in the middle of a process and you're not really sure how to drive it. But I also think that, you can't, though we may preference that middle road, we will take it however we can get it. I think that's the startup attitude should be that is, if we think there's a great reason to talk to this company, we should get there no matter what.
And staying with that a little bit, Matt, how do you, or are there clear signals to you when you're going down that path and suddenly it's quite clear that you're going to be talking to this corporate for years and years and years before you actually get anywhere? What are your kind of key top advice to startups to say, this is just sales exploration, you need to do this because this is one of the biggest clients and it will take some time, versus we need to book some revenue today and we don't have time to waste?
Yeah, so I think that you should always ask, what are you getting out of every interaction? And so it could be that out of one interaction, you get a signed contract, and obviously that's fantastic. But it's also possible that that getting to that contract will require months of discussion. But every single one of those discussions can be independently useful for you as a company. So I think in a more formal sense, you could call this, customer insight process. And there are certainly lots of conversations I've had that have not led to a contract with that company, but they've given us an insight, which is then incredibly useful. So how do they view our product, or what do they see as happening in the industry? And I think you should be careful not to be too intent on closing the sale early with a large organization, because it's probably not practical. So you should make sure you derive value out of it along the way. I think the other side of that is recognizing what the pace of each organization is and asking them honestly about it. I have a relationship right now which is on a kind of 1 month email schedule. And to me, it feels incredibly slow. But when I talked to contacts from our partner organization, it's clear that that's just their internal pace. And there's very little I can do to drive that pace. And so it's better for me to put that aside and respond and make sure the ball is always in their court, but not try to force them into something that they're not. I think the last thing I would say is, if they aren't committing to that pace and they aren't responding, you should only spend so much energy trying to convince them. If someone doesn't want to buy what you're selling, I don't believe you can convince them to buy it. You just have to present it, and if the need is there, they will respond at their pace. And if the need is not there, create a great relationship, take those learnings and apply it to the next customer.
And by the way, if I can jump in, I think both sides, the startups and the corporates, should remember that we're always saying the corporates are selecting the startups for a program. It's actually a two-way selection. Like, it's perfectly okay for a founder to go, this isn't for me. And also the corporates should keep in mind that, the startups are selecting you too. So you should be super aware of the value prop. And so with IKEA and Pair, what I loved is the transparency in year one. There was no commitment of, we will do a pilot, because there was that just transparency and self-awareness, which made the value prop clear. Like, you may or may not get a contract, but we're going to add all this other value.
Yeah, I think that Alex is totally right.
Adding to that also, we see that the bootcamp is one way to work with startups. as I say, we should select a startup and the startup should select us. We have also, in this process, as I said, we have more than 1,000 applications coming in. We have a couple of these where we said that the bootcamp is not the right forum for us to work with. So we're taking them out and work with them in other ways also. Because the startup can be great and we can see great potential even if the bootcamp is not the right forum.
Yeah, one of the values of these super visible programs, and IKEA, I would say, there was a lot of pent-up demand on the startup side. It's not like before then you see IKEA at all the sort of startup conferences. So I think there was a lot of build-up, and that's why we had 1,200 applicants. But one of the benefits is that you hang a shingle saying innovation apply here, and then you can just direct it internally, as opposed to what you've probably experienced, Matt, is you knock on the wrong door on one of these Byzantine empires, and you can spend 6 months talking to the wrong department, and then actually it was this other person over here. So this is a way of like creating a funnel, and then it's up to the company to direct from then on.
And Alex, can you talk to us a bit more about how important it is to have the right culture for innovation within the wider firm? Because I think one of the critiques we often hear is that the innovation team sits over here, and then you've got HQ over here, and the two often don't meet. And so that in itself is an art form, and that's something that you probably have to do on a daily basis. I have to do, which is bring the company along on that innovation journey. So could you talk to us a bit more about what you see from that side of things in Rainmaking Consulting, and how do you change that culture from within?
Yeah, I think that's a huge question, if not the biggest question. We've had the privilege of working with a lot of really big and different global companies. And I would phrase the question differently. I don't think it's the right culture. It is adapt to whatever the culture is. So I'll give you just a concrete example. Is like we've worked with a really big international shipping company, and shipping, moving container routes, like safety, process, security, and that sort of, because they're born that way in their DNA, even in the way they would run a program was very, we need to know what we're doing on day 8 at 8:30, super structured, and we had to adapt. And then, with IKEA has maybe, very strong Scandinavian sensibility, and actually probably one of the first companies that said, in our selection criteria for startups we work with, culture is in the top 3, if not number 1. So in other words, if someone comes in and is super arrogant, they can have the best tech. If they're just not going to fit in the IKEA culture, the way of communicating, we don't want to work with them. That is more important than some amazing, tech breakthrough. So what I would say is self-awareness of what, let's say you're sat in the organization, you've been given the task, is like, what can this culture handle? Like, how do we translate what we're trying to do with the startups in a way that's going to work? At the same time, you got to break down some walls, right? So I always like to describe Per as the diplomatic bulldog. So the diplomatic side was understanding what hoops to jump through. Here's the rules you can and cannot break. You must go through procurement, whatever. And the bulldog is like, okay, I'm just not going to take no for an answer on this one. That balance. And that was very well adapted to the culture of IKEA. And there would be different versions of diplomatic bulldog with that shipping company, where it would probably be more heavily weighted on process and stuff like that.
If I can build on what you say, Alex, it's you're so right. And Sonal, this is one of the key things for us at IKEA, because we are a value-driven company. We're a very big sense of the culture and value and the importance of that in IKEA. So when we have selected startups, we have been looking at the 3 things, saying that, okay, how is the innovation height, the uniqueness of this innovation that the startup bring? And secondly, how well does that fit into the IKEA business model? And thirdly, the culture and value of the team. Is this a team that we see that we will work with long term? Because in an IKEA, if you look at our normal suppliers, the ones making furniture or driving goods to you, we have 11 years is this the average time you are a supplier for IKEA. So we always think long term. So when we select the partners to work with, the startups, it is the innovation, the business fit, and the culture and values of the team. And we put like 50% of the focus on the innovation and the business fit, and 50% on the focus on the culture and value of the team. Because when we get that right, you make the contract and then you put it in a drawer and you never look at it, because you share a set of culture and values. And that to us is a success criteria for long-term collaboration.
Yeah. I think what you guys are saying is relationships between corporates and startups are as nuanced as human relationships, right? And you have to kind of date, which is our startup bootcamp, and figure out what works, what doesn't work. And sometimes there is a really true cultural fit, which makes magical collaboration like you guys. And sometimes it might just not be at this time, or it might not just work at this moment or in this region. But I think there are core things that corporates can do to improve working with startups. Things like reducing onboarding time, making it easier to do pilots, all of that stuff that makes it easier for Matt, for companies like yourself to actually trial out products with large corporates quickly and learn from that. One of the things I wanted to speak to you about, or ask you about, Alex, is in the paper that you've written for Rainmaking, one of the areas that you talk about is the threat to innovation, or innovation budgets in particular, can be that we are not identifying crisply what those challenges are for the organization. And secondly, that the budgets are 12-year fiscal budgets, and you have to achieve those results within a year, whereas a startup relationship, as we all know, can be 3 to 4 years before we start to see those revenue gains. So how do you manage that balance?
Yeah, it's a tough one. And on the second one, the sort of time horizon, it's a little bit the same as with CVC, corporate VC, where we all know that a fund, typically takes 10 years to figure out if it's going to be successful. And yet the average lifetime of CVC is 3 years. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. So I mean, the short answer on the, on that balancing is the portfolio approach. Much like a VC portfolio, is that some companies, are super operational. So that shipping company was very sort of horizon one, if you're familiar with that, core, incremental. We're under huge pressure on margins. Let's try and squeeze, 0.5% on our fuel costs because that's immediate. Versus someone like IKEA is maybe a bit more patient, privately held, doesn't have to answer to a quarterly speed of results, and can just say, what, we're on a journey, it's going to take several years. So it's not putting all your eggs in one basket and being smart about what fits with what's needed, and then placing some longer term bets. I mean, one of the issues we've seen is, I was always surprised by this, is there's actually faster people turnover in corporates than in startups. So like one of our biggest business risks in our programs is pair gets promoted. Because there's so much.
Don't let it happen.
Don't do it. He's terrible. Do not promote him. Because it's just like you need people who have to longer term view. So portfolio for sure is a big one. I would say the other thing is, in terms of the 12-month cycle or longer, is so innovation teams are super useful. They coordinate, they disseminate. They capture best demonstrated practices, they measure, they storytell, but business units implement. And if you're not doing something which business units can believe is going to have an impact, then you're not going to get anywhere. But the issue is the incentives on business units, like if you're a division head or whatever, you're incentivized at best on 1 year. So, there just needs to be exec leadership at the top that says, we're going to place some longer term bets, and we have the patience that it's not going to hit the budget this year or, the P&L, but we have to do it because now we're in horizon 3. And if we don't do it, somebody else is eating our lunch, literally disrupting us. So portfolio, patience, and organizational design.
To add sorry, Sonal, just to quickly add to that, I think one thing we've learned as a best practice for us is to try to work with our corporate counterparts to draw out milestones that they can use to advocate within their organization. And a lot of times they haven't articulated them even to themselves. So, if we're running a POC, I'll say something like, is having a physical product in a test location an important milestone, or is having data at a server an important milestone, or is having a customer say, send you an email saying, hey, this is fantastic? Is that a milestone? Like what do you need to advocate internally? And frequently we find that that's not well understood, and that's then the most beneficial conversation, and it changes the nature of the work, because I think startups can also empathize that, as you say, Alex, there's a lot of turnover, and people are actually frequently in less control of their destiny in a corporate environment than they are in a startup environment. And so you have to help them. And it is whoever you're talking to on the corporate side should be your friend, right? I mean, that's the person who's making a case for you. That's not a hard sell relationship. You need to go with that person to the executive level of the organization and say, hey, look at all this awesome stuff we did. You've got to keep supporting this. And I think sometimes the startups that I talk to view it as more adversarial somehow, which is totally, totally wrong. It's like, Per took a huge risk on working with me and with us, and I recognize that, he did that. And so it's important to say, Per, how do I help you show that this was a great idea?
Yeah. And Per, how difficult did you find it to crisply define the challenges for your second iteration of the bootcamp?
Well, the whole idea with this second iteration was that we took all the learnings from the first one and all these challenges that we've been discussing here on the stream, and we built them into the second iteration. So for the second iteration, we went out to business owners at IKEA, business owners that in their action plan have real cases where they need a solution. So we brought it from this slightly outside the core. We brought it totally into the core, saying, okay, you have a need as a business person that you can't fulfill today. Then we support you with this cogwheel between the startup and the corporate. We support you with a cogwheel here, the bootcamp, where we find the startups for you, and you go through the process. Together with us, you select the startup. Together with the startup, we co-create the solution. And then we work in a facilitated manner towards a real pilot based on your actual need. We don't know what the pilot is going to be because we're going to co-create it together with the startup. But it's going to be exactly based on your need. So for that way of working, we brought it into the core needs of the organization, but we facilitated it so that it could be developed and co-created slightly outside the core.
And you got that buy-in from the business unit from day one, right? They were part of the process.
Yes. So the business, they were the ones owning the topic, and they were the ones that owned the challenge.
The way I describe it, Sonal, and I've actually taken this to other programs now, is there was more work before the program started than during. And so it actually wasn't buy-in from day one. There was a lot of work on Per's plate to kind of create that buy-in and, identify the champions and then build momentum. But typically, the sort of frame of mind is we're going to select some startups and then the program begins. There was way more work before, so that when the startups were there, it's like super clear what to do. Another way of looking at it is like the difference from year one and year two was the funnel in year one was really wide at the top. It was like affordability, circularity, and accessibility, like really broad topics, and let's see what comes in. And year two was super narrow for, it was like, we have these 17 business problems and we know more or less what we're looking. You need to be careful to be open-minded because you don't always know what you're looking for, but it was very different. And so I always describe that image as like, how broad is your funnel right now? Do you know what you want, or are you just are you saying, I want an AI startups doing neuro-linguistic programming to reduce headcount in customer service, like super narrow, or I have a sustainability challenge. And based on that, that informs the amount of work you have to do up front, in your backyard.
And to add to that, Alex, what we did was not to come out and say we want a solution that looks like this, but we came out saying we have a challenge. We don't know the solution. That's the reason for us to find a startup. We want to, and then we have these different business areas with different business focuses, but we didn't post what we wanted to have. We posted the challenge that we wanted to have solved together. Because if we already know the answer, then we don't need a bootcamp.
Yeah.
But if we know the question, then we need to find the smart people that can help us. So when we post the question, this is our challenge. We want to find a solution together with you. Then we need smart people like Matt and Bear Conductive to come and say, hey, I have an idea. Let's together co-create solution. And that is exactly one of the things we did together with Matt, where we said, we have something here. We know the problem we want to solve, and might be we can do this together. So then together with Matt and he and the team can say, yeah, we have an idea here, and then we co-create solutions towards that. And that to me is the magic, because then we bring the challenges and the robustness and all the information we have in the big corporate together with out-of-the-box ideas and the innovators around the world, the entrepreneurs, and then we create magic together.
And I think actually that what Per just describes is probably the way for a startup to tell whether it's real or it's innovation theater. Because when when someone's looking for a specific solution, that's just a sales process, right? That's not a co-creation process. But like when they're looking for a response to a challenge, that's fantastic, right? Because you could, there are many ways to approach it, right? But you are responding to a need. I think that frequently we've found that we engage in a conversation and it's more exploratory around a new technology. So kind of corporates doing in-depth research into a technical area. And they might have a huge enthusiasm for, in my case, printed sensor technologies, but they actually don't understand the use cases for them or the solutions or the challenges that they're responding to. And we've often ended up in a situation where we realize that we know more about the downstream customer than they do. And that's then a really strange situation because we don't want to give away all our hard-won research. I think what Per describes is the opposite of that, where I remember some of the things, some of the challenges that Per presented me with. I questioned him. I said, "What are you talking about? Like, is this really a problem for people, in their homes?" And IKEA knows exactly what the challenges people face are. And it was wonderful because they injected that challenge with so much specificity, we could respond to it. And those constraints are what create a great collaboration. And so we leverage their insane knowledge of the problem to create some really exciting stuff.
And sometimes the opposite is true, where we worked on a project that had to do with cargo pilferage, containers. That's $100 billion problem where people go in and steal Nike shoes or whatever.
Yeah.
And that was just like, that was the brief, super wide funnel. And we found a ton of startups that themselves weren't even aware that, first of all, it's $100 billion problem. So do you realize like the commercial opportunity? And secondly, whatever you're doing on, I don't know, motion sensing or whatever the case is actually super applicable here. So it's sometimes it's both ways. So that's I always say, even if the funnel is super narrow, be very broad in where you look because you don't know what you're going to find.
Yeah, we find that a lot in fintech, where there's so many applications of the product around finance that people actually wouldn't even initially be going down that route. And then we say that this is actually a core problem that we face in banking, and they pivot slightly to open up to the finance world. So we have to talk about COVID-19. We're all not seeing each other in person today. We're all Zooming, or actually not Zooming in this case. And I think we've seen an absolute change during this crisis in terms of a rapid migration to more digital needs, digital focus, and that's where this crisis really it is quite different from previous crises. And I wanted to talk a little bit around that. So we're now communicating through Zoom. We are educating through virtual classrooms. The government is using an app to collect data on being able to control the infection. Payments had to be cashless. This is huge for industries or startups in particular that have been pushing that digital agenda. So, Matt, how do you think that this new environment or new adoption of digital is going to impact the startup ecosystem, and then in particular your product?
Yeah, so I think the biggest change that we've seen is that obviously my travel schedule has dramatically reduced, which I love, because as our business has been growing and we've created partnerships with more large corporations all over the world, I have this personally was having an increasing guilt about the impact that I was having, but also felt stuck because 6 months ago, if someone in the US or someone in Europe or someone in Scandinavia said, let's meet, it was very hard for me to argue that we should just have a Zoom because I didn't look committed to the opportunity. And in fact, I was in the States earlier this year with 2 board members to go to a meeting that got canceled because of COVID. And then 2 weeks later, we held a kind of marathon 8-hour Zoom with various business units, and it's worked great. And we have a great relationship and things are moving forward. And that is incredibly positive. Like from a kind of personnel and a practical thing, it's wonderful because I don't have to fly around. But then also I just feel much better about the way we run our business. All of that travel was driven by the corporate, or at least it was driven by my feeling that that's what the corporate required. So that going away is great.
You look better too, Matt.
Oh, thanks, Alex. Thanks. Yeah, you guys should have seen me. You guys should have seen me before COVID. But yeah, no, it really, I think that's been awesome because it just created, in fact, it's a small anecdote. There's an insurance company that we work with, and they apparently had a 2-year work from home transition plan that they were 6 months into, and everyone in the organization felt it was too aggressive. Well, guess what? Like 2 months later, it's all done, and so I think that's good. I think that if you look at this just quickly from an economic perspective, so like, what does this mean in terms of the cash flow of startups? I think there's 2 things to think about. Maybe 6 months ago, people suddenly started talking about startups needing to be profitable, which to me was never a particular revelation. A business should be able to stand on its own feet as soon as absolutely possible. And I think COVID will reinforce that. The startups who aren't needing to desperately run to investors now are going to be in a much better position in 6 months or a year than those that are going to scrape by or those who aren't going to survive at all. I think the other side of it is that certainly we feel like corporates have to meet us much more halfway in tight times. So I had a conversation with someone last week, which was very straightforward, which is I'm excited about what we're doing, but there has to be some benefit to me in a near-term horizon. And if there's not, I can go to a competitor and I'm sure that they will provide that benefit. And so I think there has to be some recognition that if corporates want to benefit from startup innovation, especially in times like this, they can make themselves super attractive by saying, you know what, let's do a technology evaluation. Let's let's pay you to spend some time with us. That's a super attractive thing right now. And as Alex said, startups are selecting corporates too. So that's an important thing to think about during COVID.
Can I make a super short remark? Two remarks. One is I think the impact distribution of COVID is super uneven. So, it's not like the world has changed everywhere. Some things have gone very, very quickly back to normal, and others have been complete. So I don't think, for example, business travel, there's no way it goes back to baseline. I just don't. Too many taboos have been broken. But I think more importantly, maybe for the more corporate part of the audience, is I think this thing has a window of opportunity to squeeze in those really hard projects. Like there's a risk tolerance. Yesterday, I live in Denmark, super progressive, advanced healthcare. I had my first call. My son had a consultation. It was like telehealth implemented. We've been talking about telehealth for 10, 20 years. And all of a sudden, all these taboos, all the stakeholders, all the moments, like we need to talk to a doctor, boom. And they found an app and it got done. And I don't think that lasts forever, that window, but now's the time to put in those really hard projects, because there's just, even on a societal level, there's like a willingness to, well, look, we did all these things in 3 weeks, we changed everything. Come on, let's push those hard ones. And then the regular risk aversion will come back on the corporate side quickly. So there's now's the time to swing for the fences on some things. The problem is budgets are cut, but that's another discussion.
Adding to that, guys, I think exactly what you say, Matt. So before, when we as a corporate should invite the startup to a meeting, it is a hassle. We don't want to spend the time or the money for the startup to come if it's super concrete, and then we can't have somebody flying from, like Matt's case, from London, and then go to the office without having, a 6-hour schedule. So, and then we can't fill a 6-hour schedule, so then we don't take the meeting. Now every meeting is digital. It is easy for us to say, hey, Matt, can we just have 45 minutes call? We want to discuss a thing with you.
Yes.
So I think from our perspective, we continue to use all the learnings we had during COVID-19. We would be, from a corporate perspective, much better in having frequent discussions with startups that reach out, that have the discussions, take the decisions without making a long and bureaucratic process about it. So I see really a lot of positive learnings that I want to take with us for the post-COVID.
And last question to anybody, in terms of digital agendas for large corporates, what should be top of mind? Let's talk about IKEA. What's number one on the digital agenda for IKEA?
It is to continue to create a better life for the many customers, the many people out in the world. And we want to do that by enabling them to get in contact with IKEA, to get what they want, knowledge, goods, in a way that is based on the customer's perspective. Everybody can't travel, they won't travel. So we need to make sure that they can, with the digital offer, get access to IKEA.
Great, thank you. That was incredible. I think we could all talk all day, and it's quite nice to not have an audience right in front of us, because it feels like we're just having a quiet chat. We can get into the real nitty-gritty. So I think we're going to be joined by Tabitha soon, and then there will be a Q&A session after. So if anybody has questions, we're here to answer them.
Want access to more CogX videos? Subscribe now for free at cogx.co.